sponsored by Blackmagic Design, the world's highest quality products for the feature film, post and broadcast industries. Blackmagicdesign.com. And by the Tonkawa Film Festival, celebrating short films from around the world. Tonkawafilmfestival.com.
Hello and welcome to No Rest for the Weekend. I'm Jason Godbey, and today on the program, we're going to be talking about some of the films from this year's AFI Fest. And joining me via Zoom, our man in Hollywood and the man behind ActuallyPaid.com, Mr. William Hammon. Welcome back.
I think I just woke up from the festival about 2 hours ago, so this is good timing.
Man, you shotgunned so many movies into your eye holes for this festival. Now, you went last year. How many films did you see last year?
I did 15 last year. I went one step beyond this time and did 16 in 5 days.
That is insane. That is nobody. You are the hardest working man in critics business here. Tell me about, so this is a little bit of a different year because last year we had the strike. Tell me about this year.
Different kind of atmosphere this year. There was like a mixture of excitement and exuberance while also tiptoeing around the current events issues that were making a lot of people nervous, because a lot of the films have to do with things like war and immigration and all these other things that are now, hot button issues. But the turnout was much larger this year. There were several screenings that were sold out or near sold out, whereas last year only the marquee events were pretty heavy. There was much more of a celebrity presence this year, whereas last year, obviously, the strike basically made it so that they couldn't show up. Most of the A-listers were at the red carpet premieres for films like Here and Juror Number 2, but you did get a good dose of celebrity presence within the main Chinese theater and the offshoot theater where most of the screenings took place. Quite literally, one night, I accidentally bumped into Leonard Maltin, for example. And kind of got starstruck for half a second before apologizing, excusing myself, and moving on. There was a documentary about the band Devo, and just by coincidence, I was wearing my Oh Hi Mark shirt from The Room, and Mark Mothersbaugh was there doing a Q&A. I was like, oh my God, if I can get a picture with him while I'm wearing this shirt. It didn't happen, but it was like, if that could have been a thing, that would have been amazing, that sort of things. So yeah, there was definitely much more of a celebrity presence this time around, much more of an industry presence this time around, and just more fans in general. I went to see, I believe, 8 films that were submitted by respective countries for the International Feature Oscar, and those audiences were half full of native speakers and immigrants. So it was like, this was definitely a situation unlike last year where a lot of people came out for these films. And of course, just on the quality of the content, huge upgrade this year. Like most of the films last year were good to great. There were some that I just didn't care for one reason or another. This time, out of 16 films, I think the lowest grade I would give is a B-. So everything was really solid across the board, and there were a couple that were just like, oh my God, Academy voters, get your pens ready,
Tell us about what you saw. What's the first movie you saw?
Okay, first up is Nightbitch. This premiered at Toronto back in September and then kind of toured around the festival circuit, including AFI Fest, and it'll be released in early December nationwide. This was one of the celebrity appearances we had. Amy Adams, the star of the film, did a Q&A afterward, and she is just as much of a goddess as she has always been. The film itself is kind of like a dark comedy, a little bit of body horror. So Amy Adams plays a relatively new mother. Her child is about 2, maybe 3 years old. Her husband, played by Scoot McNairy, is a businessman who is often away on trips. So she's kind of left to raise the kid on her own, balance all these things that new moms have to balance, while trying to hold on to both her sanity and, the last vestiges of her career as an artist. She goes to these mommy and me book readings at libraries. She hangs out with some other moms in her group. But what strikes you is that this film, written and directed by Marielle Heller, it's very feminist, but it's also counter-feminist to what the entertainment industry considers feminism. Like, one of the big things is this film does not pass the Bechdel test. I don't particularly put any stock in that test. It's kind of arbitrary and weirdly militant in some places. But Amy Adams' character is simply called Mom. Her husband is simply called Husband. The kid is basically just called Son. So many of these characters, all three of the main characters, have no names. The only named characters are the friends in her mom group, and they only talk to each other about their kids and their husbands, so it does not pass the Bechdel test. It's kind of funny in that regard. But the big thing, the big selling point of the film, it's not just the witty dialogue and the sharp adult humor of it. It's the fact that as Amy Adams' character starts kind of losing her grip on things, she starts transforming into a literal dog. It's a bit of magic realism where she finds what looks like a cyst on her lower back and pops it, but it's actually a tail growing. You know, she starts getting a taste for raw meat. Several neighborhood dogs, leave dead animals on her porch as almost like they're trying to woo her. It's very odd. And it kind of combines elements from a few other movies. Like, there are tons of films out there about how hard it is to be a mom. Tully, the Babadook, one that just came out last month called Another Happy Day, I think, with Lauren Lapkus. Like, this is a trope that's been done to death, and also the transformation of a woman when her body is going through changes into an animalistic form. That ground was covered at last year's AFI Fest by Malaysia's entry Tiger Stripes, which I didn't particularly like. It had its moments, but it wasn't really that great of a film. So you combine all those, and you finally get a version of this that works. It's by no means spectacular. It's not like the be-all, end-all, but to watch Amy Adams carry this, you realize once again how great of an actress she is. She's been nominated for the Oscar 6 times, and this should easily be her 7th nomination. And I just sat there thinking, like, if she can't win for this, I don't know what else she can do. I'm not saying she would necessarily get my vote because I haven't seen everything else out there yet, but what more can one artist do? Like, she is just a force of nature in this, literally and figuratively. And she takes what is a very tired premise with some magical realism elements to it and sells it for all it's worth, just keeps punching and punching. You honestly wonder how she has the energy to keep it going, especially when the film itself, again, this is intentional on Heller's part, kind of like goes to decent lengths to gaslight her, to make her look unattractive, to make her seem unreasonable in certain points, and then to bombard her with even more unreasonable things, like her husband coming home from a trip and complaining that there's no milk in the fridge. She's trying to take her first shower in 4 days, and she's like, just go out and buy some if you want some that badly. It was like, I can't do everything. It was like, there's a weird catharsis in that. And even if you're a man, you should be watching this to think, holy crap, if I have family like this, if I have a wife and a kid, or if I ever want to, I better check myself before I riggedy wreck myself. Like, there are those moments of, oh my God, you could just kick Scoot McNairy right in the crotch. But again, that's the way he's written. It's Marielle Heller overselling the point, but in a way that works because, again, that's the intent. And if you didn't have someone as stellar as Amy Adams anchoring all this, it probably would have just gone completely off the rails. Like, there are a lot of actresses out there who are good in their own elements, but you couldn't see someone like Kristen Stewart doing this. It just wouldn't mesh. With Amy Adams, I've been a fan of her since Junebug, where she plays a young pregnant woman. She knows how to handle this kind of material, and she's absolutely spectacular.
That sounds so weird. That film, just when you describe it, it sounds so strange. I saw, like, I remember we talked about it on the preview, like the fall movie preview episode, and I did not know what to make of it myself, but I just thought that is strange. But if anybody can pull it off, it's Amy Adams.
Yeah, and it's a bit polarizing. I think the film has about a 65% rating on Rotten Tomatoes after its festival run. So that may fluctuate once it gets released, depending on which non-festival critics get a chance to see it. But this is definitely a Best Actress showcase vehicle, and I look at it as, yeah, like in lesser hands, this could be a disaster. In Amy Adams' hands, it's not only entertaining, but it creeps ever so close to the pantheon for the year.
All right, high praise from Bill. All right, let's see if we get better with the next film. What do we got next?
Okay, this is one, a little bit of early access for you. Unfortunately, you won't get to see this one for a while. It's called The Luckiest Man in America. It does have distribution after it debuted at Toronto, but it will not be released until sometime next year. No date has been set yet. This one hits a little close to home for me because it's about the game show industry. That's where I work my 9 to 5. It's where I make my money. And one of the legends of the game show world, one of the greatest stories in game show history, is that of Michael Larson, who went on the game show Press Your Luck back in the 80s, and somehow he'd become such an obsessive on the show as part of a get rich quick scheme. Basically, he was basically a con man, but he worked his way onto the show, and he had studied tape for so long that he realized that at the time, the patterns of the big board and the lights and the whammies were pre-programmed. They weren't random. Every game board fell into one of 5 set patterns, developed by the producer Bill Carruthers, who's played here in the movie by David Strathairn, who's excellent. So Michael Larson, played in the movie by Paul Walter Hauser in absolutely perfect casting. He goes on the show, he recognizes which pattern the board's in, and he goes off, winning over nearly $200,000 on the show because he beat the game. Michael Larson is not what we would call a good person, but he did something truly fantastic on this show, showing that a game can be beaten if you do your work hard enough. You can outsmart the machine. So I was chomping at the bit to see this movie because I wanted to see how director Samir Oliveros would depict this. Because it's sensational, but given that it's a game show that is based on luck and trivia, you do kind of have to ground it in reality. And I think Oliveros strikes the right balance. It's definitely more Hollywood than you think it would be, but in those moments it works just enough. Like, you have the host of the show, Peter Tamarkin, played by Walton Goggins, and you don't think just on the name alone that would be a good match, but weirdly it is. You have Maisie Williams from Game of Thrones playing a member of the stage crew who's like a contestant producer. Okay, like here's this girl who's randomly British. Sure, why not? There's a weird side scene where Larson stumbles on to the set of a talk show hosted by Johnny Knoxville. So like, and that's one of the weird emotional moments of the film. It's like, okay. Like those are weird Hollywood dramatization elements. Because one of the weird things about game shows, and maybe the audience knows this, maybe they don't, a lot of what's flashy about a game show is the stage presentation. The nuts and bolts of it can be honestly quite boring if you're not keyed into that stuff like I am, because again, that's my job. So yeah, when you have this whole system that's predicated upon 5 patterns and you're crossing your fingers that no one figures it out, there is that gamble that someone will. that's not really addressed in the film, other than just to kind of be like, really, you only came up with 5 patterns? The reality of it is that was a calculated risk that CBS took, when they greenlit the show. And it just took that long for someone to exploit it. And there are a lot of scenes where Carruthers and the rest of the backstage crew, in essence, try to sabotage Michael Larson. That's just patently illegal. If you ever saw the movie Quiz Show, that's why it's illegal. So there is one person backstage who's kind of what the standards and practices represent, basically your lawyer on set telling you what you can and can't do. On all the shows I've worked on, this person would have intervened a long time before to just say, hey, he's not cheating. He just beat you. You got to let it go. Whereas for the purposes of a movie, you have to create that tension. So as a piece of entertainment, I love this movie. As someone who does this for a living, I know where it's very much inaccurate, but I can still dismiss it, on the grounds of dramatic license, because Paul Walter Hauser and David Strathairn and Walton Goggins are just selling the moment perfectly. Trying to think who else is in it. Shamir Anderson does a really good job too, as one of the producers who kind of goes back and forth between wanting to sabotage or help him, just to not be the scapegoat when everything goes wrong. There's a lot of fun elements like that. Most of the characters are composites. Names are changed to protect the innocent, that sort of thing. For what it is, it's very entertaining, and it captures that weird suspense of watching an episode of Pressure Luck even today with the Elizabeth Banks version. There's definitely a lot of loopholes to jump through and a lot of stuff that's just created out of whole cloth for the sake of drama, but it gets right the things it needs to get right. And that's why when it comes out next year, you kind of owe it to yourself, if you're a game show fan at all, or if you're just a fan of, the little guy beats the, David versus Goliath type of thing, you should check it out.
It sounds good. You mentioned Quiz Show. I like that film, so I definitely want to check this one out. And we'll hopefully be able to keep you posted when it does come out. But what do we? We're running out of time, so what do we got next?
Okay, next is The Room Next Door. This is the first ever feature-length film in English by Pedro Almodovar. This is a very small, intimate film starring Julianne Moore and Tilda Swinton. John Turturro has a small role. He has like 3 or 4 scenes. He did a Q&A after the screening as well. But this is really Tilda Swinton and Julianne Moore. Basically what it is, they're both writers. Julianne Moore's more of a novelist and a biographer. Tilda Swinton is a former war correspondent, and she has come down with stage 3 cancer. So she has decided that, having been in battle, she's going to die with her boots on. She has decided to forgo any further treatment and let herself go. But what she wants is for Julianne Moore's character to literally accompany her on this journey. They rent a house in upstate New York and say, I'm going to just live out the last month of my life here. I just want you, quote, in the room next door when it happens. There's a lot of, talk about death and mortality and the meaning of life, but also a lot of really good dark humor, especially if you're an Almodovar fan. Like, half of the background supporting cast are all muscular Spanish men, because that's what Almodovar likes. That's his sexuality. He makes no secret of it. So if you know his work, those are giggle moments. There are a lot of really fun visual gags that get peppered throughout, like, what movies they choose to watch, what books they choose to read. The character the character of Tilda Swinton, her estranged daughter makes an appearance that is just hysterical towards the end. So like, there's a sense that Almodovar knows the subject matter he's dealing with, so he wants it to land as gently as possible. And the way you break through that is to laugh. So, yes, we're dealing with someone who is choosing death over life, but we're going to make sure we have laughs along the way, including Swinton and Moore giving overly emotive performances, which is counter to what Almodovar likes to do. Most of his films, they're very stoic, especially when he works with the likes of Penelope Cruz and Antonio Banderas. He doesn't like it when actors go out of their way to show their emotion. He much more prefers it if they're not quite deadpan, but read your lines as if you're a normal person reading lines rather than an actor reading lines. And he gets a lot of mileage out of that in most of his films. So this time, because he's setting it in America, because it's an English language film, because it's essentially a Hollywood film, he goes the exact opposite direction and says, play up the treacle for all it's worth, be as mawkish as you want, try to wring tears out of the audience before you make them laugh, because again, we're dealing with a lot of juxtapositions and contradictions and irony here. So to that extent, it works. And it's really fun. Moore and Swinton give really good performances. My only critique is that it does wear on you after a while, and there's a fake out at the end of the second act that we all see coming and we didn't need. It makes for one good moment in the aftermath, but we really didn't need it. So on those kind of levels, you might not engage with it as much. You may not care, how two writers discuss death, when it comes to your normal day-to-day life. But if you're looking for an interesting character study with some almost over-the-top dark comic dialogue, you might enjoy yourself on this one.
Thank you for seeing that movie, that one in particular, because it was at New York Film Festival, and I kind of did and kind of did not want to see it because of the subject matter. I was just like, I don't know if I can watch Tilda Swinton die for 2 hours. Like, I'm glad you mentioned the laughs, but it does not sound like it's a laugh riot when you read the log line. You know what I mean?
I mean, I already know my headline for my review when it comes out. Next month, it'll be Tilda's Death Do Us Part.
Do you get that feeling like this is two actors who want Oscars?
Oh, yeah. This is... I mean, I consider any film that comes out in the latter months of the year to be Oscar bait, but this is one of the baitier ones. And weirdly, Tilda Swinton and Julianne Moore both already have Oscars, so it's not like they're Amy Adams going like, I'm 0 for 6, what more can I do? But this is definitely structured in a way to say, hey, here's a Best Actress nomination, here's a Best Supporting Actress nomination, and give Almodovar a directing nomination while you're at it, kind of deal. There aren't really that many big creative artistic elements. The cinematography is really good, but editing, sound, visual effects, beyond Swinton and Moore, you really only have John Turturro as the other side character. Everybody else is like 1 or 2 lines, so it's very small. It's very intimate. You can probably get some mileage out of the production design of Tilda Swinton's apartment versus the house they move into. Minor details like that. But yeah, this is very much an acting showcase and a writing and directing showcase.
Do you feel like of these 3 that we've talked about, do you see nominations for all 3?
I don't see any nominations for Luckiest Man in America, again, because it's not going to come out till next year. And even then, maybe Paul Walter Hauser gets one, depending on when it's released. Like, if they release in the spring, it'll be forgotten by the time award season rolls around. But if they aim for, like, September next year, he might get some attention. But yeah, I can definitely see, and I would honestly expect Amy Adams to get nominated for Best Actress. And I can see a strong campaign for Swinton and Moore, but it could also go the same way as May December did last year, where they plugged for Natalie Portman and Julianne Moore, and neither one of them got nominated.
All right, we're going to wrap it up for right now. Bill, thanks for joining me once again. You are the best. For people who want to know your work, find you online, where can they find you?
I am at actuallypaid.com. You might have noticed a dearth of content in the last month. Guess what? Because I was at AFI Fest watching 16 movies. But you can also find me on Twitter and YouTube at actually_paid. And of course, right here on No Rest for the Weekend and the Behind the Rabbit Productions Media Network.
All right. Thanks, man. And we'll see you again real soon. And that's all for this edition of No Rest for the Weekend. Thanks so much for taking this trip down the rabbit hole once again. For more of our content, including more movie reviews, visit norestfortheweekendpodcast.com. You can subscribe on your favorite podcast platform or on YouTube, youtube.com/getbehindtherabbit. I'd like to thank Bill Hammon and our sponsor, Blackmagic Design. For Behind the Rabbit Productions, I'm Jason Godbey. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time.
This is the BTRP Media Network.